Welcome to A Matter of Perspective with Judge Derwin Webb. I am Judge Derwin Webb, coming to you from the Fraser History Museum. We are in our final taping of Black History Month, and I am honored to be joined with the president of the Louisville branch of the NAACP, Mr. Raoul Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Cunningham, I wanted to have you on the show for the last taping because you are history itself. Some of the things that you have done, some of the things that you have seen, I have not seen. I've read about, I've heard people talk about, you actually live some of the things that I want to discuss today. But before we get to some of the actual events, I want you to tell us how you actually got involved with the NAACP.
My mother had signed me up for the youth council when I was young. She bought me a membership along every year when she bought hers. A former neighbor of mine was president of the youth council. He was at Presbyterian Theological Seminary and got me involved. I was the youngest member for a long time because most of them were in grad school or at the University of Louisville. And I became involved. They let me tag along. And that was it. You know, they were active and I enjoyed being with them. And I just stayed with the NAACP.
Let me ask you this question. When did it go from just something to do into the passion that you have right now? What actually changed the course of you not wanting to be a part of it, but actually be involved, if you understand what I mean?
Christmas of 1959, Porgy and Bess opened up at the Brown Theater.
That was one of the black films back in the day, wasn't it?
It was a black film, all black film, all black cast. The Brown was segregated. And they had mail order tickets. We ordered our tickets, and on Christmas Day we went. Of course, we were denied, and we began picketing. That sort of enabled me, and that was my first actual demonstration. And from that, you know, realizing that you couldn't go into a movie, it made me aware of the need. And I wanted to be a part of the solution of trying to end segregation. And I stayed with the NAACP.
Well, let me ask you this question, because we're in the Fraser History Museum right now. I'm able just to walk down the hallway and get a drink of water, no problem. I'm able to go downstairs and get a sandwich if I want to. For kids that may be watching this that do not understand what it was like in the late 50s, early 60s, can you kind of give them a little summary of what it was like for you to have the luxuries that we have today?
Okay. But I think, first of all, I'd like for them to try to realize and picture Louisville as it was in 1961. There were no McDonald's. White Castle was about the only fast food restaurant we had. I-65 was being built downtown. So there were no expressways. They were just being built in Kentucky. You could not try on clothes at most stores. 4th Street was the central city or the central business district, as well as the entertainment center. There were no shopping malls, with the exception of Dixie Manor out on Dixie Highway was the first shopping mall in Louisville. So everything was downtown, 4th Street. You could not go in the restaurants. You could not go in the movie theaters. We had 3 black movie theaters, all of them on Walnut Street, which is now Muhammad Ali. Life was totally different in terms of being able. We couldn't even try on clothes in stores.
Hmm.
If that gives you a picture of how Louisville was, say in 1961.
Now, I know you were part of some of the demonstrations where you actually were incarcerated. Uh, Tell us about how things led up to that first demonstration where you were actually arrested and what it was
Okay.
like during that time.
Stewart's dry goods store was the largest department store in Louisville, located at 4th and now Muhammad Ali. Their lunch counter was segregated. They enforced no black try-ons in terms of garments. If you wanted to buy a pair of shoes there, they would trace your foot on that white butcher block paper.
Well, wait a minute, wait a
We,
minute. Explain that.
you couldn't try on shoes.
So basically, they would do a chalk around your foot, and
That's
based upon the
correct.
size of your foot, they would find the shoe and give it to you
Yeah,
after that.
yes. And if you had high arches, that was. And once you took it out the store, you could not return it.
Wow. Okay.
Now, my parents would not shop in a store where we could not try on.
Hmm.
The restaurant in Stewart's was downstairs. We had gone there over the weekend and closed it. That Monday morning, before going to school, my mother had a talk with me to ask me if she said that they're not going to allow you to keep closing Stewart's. Are you prepared to get arrested? Yes, I thought. Now, we had a policy that if I got in trouble and got arrested, I would probably rather face you as a judge than face my mother. But she said, this is a difference. If you get arrested, and at that time, let me say, I was 17.
Hmm.
So was treated as a juvenile. That if you get arrested, you call me. When we went to Stewart's now we would go to school, and right after school, most of us were students at Mayo, which at that time was at Brook and Breckenridge Streets,
Hmm.
and Central. There were a few from Manual and other schools. We would meet at the end of Chestnut Street Y, and then walk to 4th Street, where we went into Stewart's. There were 18 of us that day. They decided to arrest us. I was in ROTC at Mayo and had my ROTC uniform on, was an officer and had my saber. And we had taken the pledge for nonviolence.
Hmm.
Although I really wanted to take that saber and use it, but we didn't. I didn't. They took me down, and after a while, a cousin of mine who was on the line with me bought him and 3 more individuals in. That was the first day. That next day, we went to court that morning, and we were paroled into the custody of our parents.
Mm-hmm.
That same day that we had the first court appearance, we went back, and we had grown from 18 to 75.
Mm-hmm.
And every day after that, we grew. We had as many as 300 young people downtown demonstrating.
How many days of demonstration did it take for stewards to basically change their policy and start
Oh my God.
integration?
Let's go back. In early part of 61, Louisville then had the aldermanic system of government.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Beckett was the only African American on the board of aldermen. He had introduced a public accommodation ordinance, which would have made it illegal for businesses of public accommodations to deny anyone service. That ordinance was not, he couldn't even get a second. Now, we started demonstrating in February of 1961. You had the election in November. The Democratic administration had refused to pass public accommodations. Mr. Woodford Porter and others had a voter registration drive. While the students were demonstrating, the adults were registering to vote.
Mm-hmm.
We also had the Nothing New for Easter campaign, which was a boycott of downtown businesses. And we would not, as you know, in those days, Easter and Christmas were our major days for getting new clothes.
Right.
And we decided that we would join that boycott and we would not get anything new for Easter.
Mm-hmm.
With all of that going on, it took the election of 1961 to throw the Democrats out who had not passed public accommodations and put the Republicans in. They hee-hawed for another year. And it was in May of 1963 that they finally passed the ordinance which desegregated Louisville. So, now we weren't demonstrating that whole time.
Right.
We demonstrated on up until that summer.
So
Then I went away to college.
I was going to say, you went to Howard at that time, so you go to
Yeah.
college, and by the time you come back, maybe after your freshman year, that's when you are finally allowed to go to some of the places that you originally.
No.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sophomore year.
Sophomore
63.
year. Oh, 63. Okay, okay.
So when you ask how long, it took that long. From the 61 demonstrations, and in the meantime, the NAACP and other civil rights organizations were all pushing for the public accommodations ordinance.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because this has kind of given me something to think about as we see today. How do you see the protests and the demonstrations of the movements that we have today? How do you think they compare to what you were going through back in the 60s? Are there any similarities? Do you see a lot of differences? How do you compare the two?
There were similarities. In terms of demonstrations are a tactic that you use to draw attention to a situation. Our sit-ins drew attention to segregation. The demonstrations that the protesters used last year drew attention to the need of police reform and the need for social justice reform. The demonstrations served their purpose. They were successful. One of the major differences, in the 60s, we took the nonviolence pledge.
Mm-hmm.
These demonstrations did not have to do that. The demonstrations of today had way more white people involved than we had in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But they both served their purpose. The year before the demonstrations began, we had a meeting with the mayor of Louisville, the NAACP did, and we requested a civilian police review board. He rejected that outright.
Mm-hmm.
You have the demonstration, and he's now supportive. So that shows you that the demonstrations did work.
Right.
Now, the city council passed it. It's now in Frankfurt. And that is with subpoena powers. And let me add that important factor there. We're waiting to see what the legislature is going to do. If they're going to grant subpoena powers to the Civilian Police Review Board. The community and the city is now much more aware of social justice issues. We hope that we will get felony convictions outlawed in our state constitution, but that's going to take another session of the General Assembly.
Mm-hmm.
But you must admit that the demonstrations made the community aware of social justice issues.
Mr. Cunningham, I was asked you this question, and believe me, there's no right or wrong answer to it, but I do have to pose the question to you. These issues have affected our country for years. And you started your crusade back in the late 50s, early 60s, trying to gain equality for issues of social justice and reform of different things. We're back in 2021 now. Some of these issues came to the forefront with some of the killings, like, for example, of George Floyd here in Louisville, Breonna Taylor. So we're back to demonstrating again. Are you hopeful, because you've been in the struggle for a while, are you hopeful that things will change for everyone? We talk about being in Black History Month. You think about Dr. King. You talk about black folks, white folks, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics joining together to make things better. Are we close, or do you see us going back to some of the ways of the 60s? Because my father just passed away, and we used to have conversations a lot and talked about how things were getting better at times, but he also saw remnants of the 50s and 60s prevalent today. So where do you think we are as Louisvillians, and where do you think we are on our way to based upon the events that we experienced over the past couple of years? Very broad, general question, but still, I just want to know your response.
There's no question that we've made progress. But if you'll recall how proud we were when President Obama was elected president, the pushback became more evident then. Those who would work to oppose him. So we made that giant step forward and we took some steps backward. We elect Vice President Harris and look at where we are today with a divided nation. So we made progress on one hand and we took some steps backward. And I guess that has been true the entire history of the nation. And I guess that's the reason I stay with the NAACP, to do my part, or what little part I can play, as we continue to try to make progress. You know, when the Supreme Court enacted Brown versus Board of Education, we never would have thought that there were gaps in education. We thought that Brown v. Board settled the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't. And so we take some steps forward and we take some steps backward. But you've got to continue. Every generation will have its challenge or its challenges. And we've got to try to meet them, whether it's with demonstrations. And let me say this, as important as demonstrations are, demonstrations itself, without the vote, the demonstrations didn't change it. We could still be marching from 1961 until they passed the Public Accommodations Ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it takes a combination of willingness to demonstrate, but the vote becomes so important.
Agreed.
And if we had not voted, we still could have segregation. So, and when you ask me, realizing as a young person how important the vote was, I was able in my career to be a part of civil rights. I worked for a United States Senator for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in state government as Deputy Commissioner of Personnel and had the affirmative action plan that I was instrumental in helping to write and implement. So, I'm a firm believer in civil rights and government and voting.
I once heard someone say that protest without voting is just exercise. It's not
Yeah,
progress.
yeah.
As far as progress is concerned, looking forward into the future, what do you think the role of the NAACP needs to be in making changes that will promote unity and promote equality throughout the country?
The role of the NAACP or any civil, our mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic well-being of all individuals, and to eliminate racial discrimination and hatred. That role won't change. Tactics may change, but the role and the mission will not change. And therefore, civil rights organizations have to maintain their constant vigilance. You look at today, the number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced in various legislative bodies to suppress the vote. Civil rights organizations have to maintain the vigilance to protect and oppose those pieces of legislation. And I think that's what we've got to continue. Whether in Kentucky we will not have an election this year, but the legislature is taking some of the rights away that we had this past year in voting. Now, it's not as bad as in some places, but that is still voter suppression.
Well, I would say this, and I have one final question for you because I just have to show you this. Yes, I am a card-carrying member of the NAACP, so I just want to
We
let you see
appreciate that. We
want to
know
let you
you
see
are.
that. I wanted to say this. I want to ask a question. You have been in the struggle since you were 14 years old, as you say. Got involved with the NAACP because your mother signed you up. You have been involved with the organization on the national level. Obviously, you're leading the local branch right now into the future. As you look into the future, what makes you continue to be hopeful? Because we're still enduring some of the issues that we endured back in the 50s and 60s, and well before then, we're still suffering from those things. What makes you hopeful for a brighter future?
The world is changing. Some attitudes are changing. I think you become hopeful as you cling to the idealism of American democracy. Now, it's not what it should be, and I don't know if it will ever be what it should be. When I was in school, I was a member of the debate society at Howard. And when Congress first raised its salary to $25,000 a year, we were sitting around and just wishing that the day would come when we could make $25,000 a year. And when we got there, it wasn't what we thought it would be. The same was true when you looked at the George Wallaces. And we thought, well, when the George Wallaces and the bimbos are gone, when they've passed on, surely in 25 years we will not have a problem. Well, George Wallace, the bimbos, or Barbers are gone. Been gone longer than 25 years. We still have not reached where we thought we would be. But there is a glimmer of hope that we can reach that apex and that we can reach 100% of first-class citizenry. And that becomes the goal.
Well, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Yeah.
Brother Cunningham, I just want to thank you for being on this show, for all the things you've done to promote equality and all the things that you're doing for our community to make it better, not only for me, but for my kids and my kids' kids. So thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for being a part of A Matter of Perspective.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your membership.
Well,
We look forward to working with you.
I look forward to working with you as well. And believe me, I will be active in being involved because I want to see Louisville be the best representation of itself and live out the true creed and make sure that we all have the opportunity to be on a level playing field and be equal in everyone's eyes.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I like to tell people, I'd like to tell you as well. It's not a matter of what I say. It's not a matter of what you think. At the end of the day, it's all a matter of perspective. Brother
Thank
Cunningham,
you.
thank you for being on.
Thank you.